Well, welcome back to Sister Wives Now, where instead of the redemption tour, healing process, and apology tour we thought we were getting instead came something much more akin to a gradual unwinding of a very tedious and very specific message that Kody Brown has been trying to spin for years now. And from the very onset of this episode, something felt very, very wrong with the prospect of watching yet again the struggles and strife of sister wives being used as a lesson and a message to those of us outside of the Brown family to stay in our marriages at all costs. And again, from the very onset of this episode, the very palpable tension felt within the atmosphere where not only did the words sound forced and rehearsed, but where very emotions felt to be placed alongside. Those words felt strangely incongruous from the very onset. And within the very first few minutes of this unfolding drama played out on television, social media exploded with fans alike posting the same message. This feels very much like a very deliberate mess being presented here by Kody Brown to sister wives and to the fans alike. And this, of course, gets to the very heart of why Janelle's pointed and simple question about going to a 12-step program resonated so strongly within those viewing this very important and very much anticipated season premiere of Sister Wives Now. And again, this gets to the very simple and very pointed question of where the very motivation to make these apologies now comes from within Kody Brown's very misguided attempts at relationship building with those very same sister wives he's been trying so very hard to pawn off to other husbands and partners. As Janelle has told the story of what took place, what has been most apparent is not the gratitude and relief that comes from hearing the other person's apology, but the confusion, the kind that comes from hearing someone speak to you, not with you, the kind of apology that sounds more like a monologue than a dialogue, and her own admission that she needed to take some time to decompress afterwards speaks far more than any apology ever could. Because the kind of accountability that genuinely changes people doesn't leave the people they've harmed emotionally shell-shocked and questioning what is and is not real. And the audience picked up on this immediately, flooding the comment sections in the likes of this doesn't sound like the kind of apology that feels sincere. This is checking the boxes, and this is the kind of thing he probably rehearsed. And from there, the guessing began in earnest, not as a diagnosis, not as a proclamation, but as the kind of pattern that has been apparent for years. The kind of pattern that has been apparent not only in the guessing and the projecting, but in the erratic behavior, in the tendency to slur his words, in the tendency to become emotionally hysterical, and in the impulsive decisions that have long been the fodder for discussion on the internet, and in layering this kind of history on top of the structure of a 12-step program. And in particular, the step towards making amends. It's impossible to see why Janelle's question struck a chord the way that it did, because suddenly, the kind of apology tour that we've been getting from Brett has started to look more and more like a procedure than some kind of journey for Brett himself. And then there's Robin's character in this whole scenario, who appears to be a part of it as a help or a helper rather than a part of the plot itself. But as soon as Kody's underlying message of how people need to stop saying all those negative things around him is revealed, there's a very swift turn of events in the narrative itself, from a very human place to a spiritual one that's almost divine in its manner of absolving Kody of any selfishness in his plans or motivations in favor of a divine mission. And fans quickly noted how very convenient this sounded and how very manipulative this seemed on its own accord, and how anyone who dared oppose it was somehow impinging upon God's plans to the extent that they themselves could very easily be portrayed as either being a holdout or a poor believer if they refused to fall in line. By the time Kody actually does sit down with Christine, the tension between them is no longer palpably obvious. It's almost suffocating, because this is a reunion between two people, one of whom has moved on and one of whom has yet to acknowledge that they are no longer the main event. And from the moment Christine listens calmly without necessarily offering the response Kody wants from her, it's almost obvious that frustration is dawning on him. A tangible sign of someone who has shown up expecting a reaction and gotten one of indifference. And this moment alone speaks volumes about the nature of the apology and the motivations behind it, because if one is truly sorry for one's behavior, then one shouldn't show up expecting a certain emotional response and shouldn't show up expecting a pat on the back for having progressed. And everyone watching this exchange made this starkly clear, noting how wounded Kody seemed by the fact that Christine wasn't melting at his feet. The biggest takeaway about this moment involving Christine is that her level of composure in the moment became one of the biggest topics of this episode, as Kody was making apologies as if his wife even needed to hear those in order to begin the process of healing, when in actuality the look on her face told the opposite story, that of healing through indifference. And social media just exploded with messages about how her level of composure in the moment specifically made her the key to healing in their relationship, as the only monument to healing in this whole relationship is in the level of disinterest that the person exhibits, or the onlooker will never know that they no longer matter as they once had in the relationship. This became apparent when Kody brought up the memory of how he never loved her, as this comment seemed more like him attempting to regain his footing in the relationship, as opposed to actually attempting to heal as he had claimed all along. The problem is, it's what made this moment specifically awkward is not only the nature of this statement, it is what it suggests, which is Christine's happiness is a product of Kody's failure, rather than Christine's decision to leave, to choose herself, to start a new life where she is no longer responsible for protecting Kody's ego, managing his moods, because it is there, of course, where the humiliation aspect is completely impossible to ignore, since instead of Kody being a transformed man, he reveals exactly what he is supposedly sorry for, which is his self-aggrandized approach, his inability to live within another man's reality, his compulsion to dictate terms of storytelling. And this is something fans immediately recognize, writing in responses to this apology that it is not Christine-centric if it is going to be all about Kody. As time went on and this episode progressed, there became a collective view among viewers, and people from all over were experiencing not only a reaction to what Kody Brown said, but a reaction to this context that he said it in, and any apology that occurs during times of litigation and times when you are under public scrutiny is automatically going to seem a little bit questionable. And when you mix in monetizing this personal apology, this collective acknowledgement of this apology as content as well as a personal apology. And that sets up a dynamic where you're struggling to distinguish between apology and performance, which is exactly what kept people tuning in and analyzing this entire experience on this season premiere episode. By the end of this chapter, though, what we're left with is far from closure or healing but a trail of questions that remain unanswered to this day. Questions of motive, questions of authenticity, questions of accountability that are being argued about among viewers to this day. Whether or not there's more to Janelle's question of whether or not there's more going on in this apology tour that has exposed discrepancies that perhaps Kody Brown didn't mean to share. But either way, if you're feeling uneasy, perplexed, or dubious about what went down, then don't worry because you're not alone, because this situation has yet to be seen through to its end. So if you want to be in the loop about what happens next, then don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can be updated whenever this discussion continues. What is frightening about this entire situation is not what is being said, but how it is being said, and far more importantly, what is being explicitly avoided. Because when you get past the religious talk, soft voice, and constructively chosen phrases, what is being repeated is what fans have seen each season, each episode, each moment, which is a very familiar story in which Kody presents himself as misunderstood hero, suffering man seeking forgiveness, when in reality he is very effectively moving out of the way of real pain in ways in which he damaged his family, which is actually exactly what fans were so upset with them about in regards to the apology moments, because they seemed less moments of real acknowledgement, which is what I believe fans wanted, in contrast to moments of realignment, in which Kody is trying to realign himself with fans, rather than with people he damaged, which, in a show where reality has never been thinly divided, is never, ever more obvious. Social media comments erupted practically the second the episode ended, as committed fans began to pick apart how Kody spoke in a way that kept his internal struggle as the prism through which the viewer was to interpret events rather than the experiences of the women and children he had harmed and abandoned, which is absolutely key to an honest and meaningful apology that takes account of its impact rather than its intentions. And yet Kody made excuses for himself in terms of his own feelings and need for healing in every possible way except one. And that was when Christine's flat effect failed to betray the same discomfort that was evident in Kody's reactions to her lack thereof, because simply through their contrast, the two of them told a story that no words could possibly convey. The scene that got the most play on the internet was Kody's seeming annoyance at Christine's use of the past simply as that, the past, because in that one word was encapsulated the entire basis of his apology, as if he were offering her something she still wanted, something she had been waiting for all these years. And when she made it clear in no uncertain terms that she had already passed on to somewhere much better, that she was healed enough to build a life anew, it's almost as if the subtext of his message of recognition on her part of his importance had been a jab to the gut from a man who has come to equate relevance with control, and who had a lot of trouble hiding it from the camera. The audience was particularly fascinated by how many times Kody brought up respect, particularly as it relates to Christine's current marriage. Particularly because, while he claimed that he respected her relationship, his subsequent actions were anything but respectful of that relationship. Ranging from his questions about her husband's presence in her life through his queries about old love claims that had long been closed and were brought back out into play in front of her husband. And so much of this only served to underscore how much of an optics play this particular apology was. Janelle's arc in this episode carried over as well, in part due to the fact that her reaction was not a burning or hot take, but a thinking and very nearly clinical observation, as if she were trying to decipher the mechanics behind the actions and not the actions themselves. And this is what made her questioning about a 12-step program so compelling, in that it represented a potential map, a potential explanation for the actions that had been exhibited, and regardless of whether this explanation has any basis in reality. There was a note of take responsibility that Kody himself failed to provide completely when he failed to apologize for the actions themselves and not just the feelings those actions engendered. Robyn's presence was not helping to quell the criticism, as many fans were frustrated with Robyn's patterns with Kody of interpreting his actions in a manner that could minimize his effect, and in the case of this episode, spiritual reasons. For his interpretation appeared to deliberately provide a protection or paradigm that validates faith over questioning. And this was not going down well with fans, who flooded forums with comments that pointing to God when answers are being asked can provide a way to close down a question rather than open it up. And the more that Robyn appeared to hide behind that paradigm, the more fans wondered whose side Robyn was on. There was also the element of the timing of all of these apologies that was not lost on the fans, that would always be called into question in terms of possible motive anytime apologies come in the midst of potential litigation, and that many were wondering if perhaps this burst of apologies was perhaps more about reputation than personal evolution, that was perhaps fueled in part because Kody had already admitted that he wanted people to stop speaking negatively about him. The reason that the scene in the episode involving Christine became so pivotal is not due to the fact that something necessarily remarkable or exceptional occurred, as it is a reaction that is actually remarkably tame in a reality television world where screaming and tantrum throwing are the currencies of choice. And what made this reaction so pivotal is the fact that it seems so out of place in that world, where Kody seemed to so desperately need the interaction and affirmation that he didn't receive, as he so openly and actively appeared to crave in the most obvious manner as he seemed to get less and less of it. The humiliation, if one could call it that, was not in the words of Christine, but in the inability of Kody to adjust to the fact that the scenario he apparently was counting on was not unfolding as he had expected. Because humiliation in this situation is not ridicule but revelation. And the revelation is that the man is still learning how to deal with the loss of control, how to gauge his worth through the reactions of others, and how to understand the fact that an apology does not necessarily get you forgiveness, gratitude, reconciliation. And the truth is, everyone could see that in an instant. And the most authentic part of the episode was not the part where apologies were made, but the part where the woman was indifferent to it. As the conversations continued to unravel online, a theme kept emerging: the recognition that this apology tour was not merely about repairing past hurts, but instead was a reinvention of public legacy, and the consequences of such intent being implicit here. Anyway, is that audiences are growing increasingly impatient with stories that favor image over substance, and that this moment became a case study in this phenomenon, as audiences no longer merely accept and receive the message presented before them, but instead question and analyze and dissect in real time. And this further adds to the pressure of such a moment, as every pause, every glance, every carefully chosen word counts, not only towards a message brought to the screen, but instead towards a larger conversation being held outside of it as well. However, by the time the episode ended, the feeling of discomfort was not relieved but enhanced, because the apology episodes left many questions unanswered regarding the notions of responsibility and the performative nature of apology, and because, for many viewers at least, the worst part was not what was said, but what was left unsaid regarding the direct apology for the hurtful actions Kody has exhibited regarding the children, and because the vagueness of the apology was merely another point that solidified the idea that Kody sees himself at the pivot of the hurt and the mending of all the other characters. And because this is telling, because this is not the end of the story by any stretch of the imagination, and if you wanted to follow this story and watch the developments that will follow, because the reactions and the fallout will only increase from here, then you have to click the like button on the video below, and also click the subscription button on this channel, and click the bell icon, because the fallout is only increasing from here. And it's in the aftermath of this particular desktop that it has become apparent that it was not in those moments that were me to be underscore and were probably intended to be underscore device shatteringly dramatic that the greatest blows occurred, but in those that were quietly revealing long-held truths. Since when an individual has invested such an amount of time in building such an elaborate tale of strength, leadership, and moral integrity, even the tiniest crumbles can be staggering. And it was this apology tour, whether it was inevitable or not, that knocked these crumbles wide open for the rest of us to witness, particularly in that Kody seemed so taken aback by the responses that he was receiving, as if his mere words were sufficient to set the emotional slate back to rights, when, in fact, it speaks volumes that this attitude has lost its potency when the individuals that they once dominated have long since moved forward. This change was evident on online platforms almost instantly, with viewers calling attention to the fact that these women are no longer acting from the point of fear, and that they are no longer acting from the point of need and hope for reconciliation, but from the point of clarity. And clarity is inherently dangerous for someone who enjoys living within the ambiguous realms, because it is within the realms of the ambiguous that one is able to reinterpret and gaslight and control the narrative. But within the realms of clarity, there are lines that are drawn, and Christine's clarity appeared to throw Kody for the long loop, because, well, anger denotes emotional investment, and investment denotes stake, and stake denotes the future, and all of these are clear indicators of something that is still on the table and up for play, because there is still something that is at stake. But the detachment denotes the close of the proceedings, and the close of the emotional investment, because there is no emotional investment at stake. And that is something that was at the heart of all the online chatter, because the balance of power within this family is clear, and Kody is not equipped to deal with that reality. And then, of course, the layer that the viewers simply could not tune out was the way in which the apologies Kody made had to do with selectiveness, in that he apologized about his anger and specific statements he made, but not about the way in which the system of behaviors manifested in his relationships. The favoritism, the emotional abandonment, the punishments he meted out when he didn't get his way, or the way in which he consistently chose his own comfort over the needs of the children. And this simply didn't fly with many viewers, as fans pointed out that apologizing for the tone of the apology without apologizing about the impact simply allows an individual, or in this case, Kody, to cop an apology without actually doing the work. Janelle's response also remained very real. Not because she presented a dramatized showdown, but in that she herself presented a far more frightening alternative to Kody: skepticism. And skepticism is a dangerous thing to a person who operates on emotional storylines, but not hard facts, because it requires them to be consistent, to prove, and to follow through, in which she is confusing herself over the apology, needs a decompression, and is willing to challenge the reason behind it, which is indicative of not being taken in by masks anymore. A phenomenon also developing in the audience, Robyn's presence in the story also was another level of tension in itself, as fans wondered if her presence was one of protection, enablement, or some combination thereof. But what was most striking was how she placed herself in the position of interpreting what Kody was saying, as if there was always some level of miscommunication, some level of misunderstanding, and this level of interpretation had a level of discomfort in regards to agency and accountability, as any level of consistent reinterpretation of another's actions can easily cross into levels of enabling and control. And this was not lost on the fans, who pointed out this kind of behavior not seen for the first time but numerous times throughout previous seasons, specifically to the detriment of the other wives. And this episode was no different, further cementing the show's theme of never allowing or ever having Kody have to understand or possibly sit with what he has done. The discussion surrounding the 12-step question continued to progress as well. As many viewers pointed out, the importance of the question is not what it proves, but what it represents, and the recognition that positive change requires structured accountability and not necessarily a heartfelt expression, and the difference is important, as it reduces the apology tour to what could be an externally driven impulse, as opposed to an internally compelled one. And viewers who were attempting not to interpret but merely observe the discussion nonetheless recognized that the timing and manner of these apologies cannot help but attract attention, especially in light of the defensiveness displayed anytime the discussion diverged from what Kody had in mind. The importance of Christine's role in this chapter of the story should not be underestimated, as it is likely that her reaction to this point in the story has become a template for disengagement that many viewers of this story will identify with and respond to. And it is likely that the support she received also identifies a larger cultural significance in favor of boundaries and not wanting to play along with reconciliation that fans of the story again noted when she was able to present a calm and emotion-free facade that reduced the conflict between herself and Kody to simply a non-starter, and therefore robbed Kody of the reaction he was looking to receive and not the resolution he was seeking, as the episode has been broken down frame by frame. There has been a definite observation made with regards to the apologetic tone that Kody offered, that this came off as a closing statement and not an opening one. The difference between the two being that a closing statement is meant to close down discourse and move on, whereas opening statements encourage discourse and open up new avenues for discussion. This observation is important due to the fact that Kody has been accused of being entitled throughout the series. What made this moment so interesting was not a single moment or piece of information revealed, but the end result of a series of contradictions, non-specific apologies without subsequent change, and a desire for spirituality without actual change. And this is a sign of a moment that leaves a viewer riveted not merely in the wake of the episode itself, but also in the wake of how this moment represents a shift in the viewer's own desire to examine and engage with the stories they are being told. Ultimately, this apology tour did not repair Kody's reputation. Instead, it has further complicated it, as it has given a voice not to a man redeemed, a man restored, a man transformed, but a man struggling to find his place in a new reality that no longer revolves around a definition that he once had a power to define for others, and whether this moment marks a turning point in that evolution is yet to be determined. But this much is clear. Audiences are no longer interested in what men do. They want what men do not do when those things do not change, and until that occurs. Cynicism will be the definition by which this conversation continues. And if you're like me, analyzing every pause, every reaction, every carefully chosen word right alongside the rest of the audience, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss any updates. Because as the story continues to unravel, the scrutiny, the reaction, and the conversations are going to intensify.